1, 2, 3. Splish splash, I was taking a bath. Long about a Saturday night.
Hi.
Hello.
I can see what he's doing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You're too safe.
What's really funny is when one of the Holocaust survivors was working with this, she's like, Dr. Bronner. Yeah, it was pretty funny. Good
awesome.
morning. Today we are at Dr. Bronner's. And it's not in Chula Vista, it's in Vista.
There we go.
Almost good, because nobody can duplicate Chula Vista. I'm here with the South Bay Historical Society and the Chula Vista Heritage Museum in the South Bay, where we have the exhibit RUTH, Remember Us the Holocaust. And for those of you that have been in the exhibit, you probably know that we featured Dr. Bronner. I'm with Mike Bronner, the grandson of Dr. Bronner. What a pleasure to see you.
It's great to see you too.
I
Thank
feel
you.
like I'm at home. I really do. You know, Ruthie spoke here. We photographed in front of the wonderful Dr. Bronner. And what I want to do as we get started, I want to know, where are you from? Where were you born? And the big question is, when did you realize that you were a Bronner? Okay. And the other thing is, what do you know about your great-grandfather who was in the Holocaust?
Wow. I only have half an hour.
Yeah.
So where am I from? I was born up in Glendale, which is a suburb of Los Angeles.
Okay.
And I ended up coming down to Vista to work for the company full-time in 2000 when I was 25 years old. But when did I realize I was a Bronner? I realized that very early on, but didn't realize like probably the impact that my grandfather had really until I went to college in the East Coast, because our products were always really big with the counterculture, and they were big with like the outdoors.
Yes.
Back in I was born in 75, so in the 80s, but it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. And I kind of grew up in a conservative neighborhood, so the only people who knew about our soaps were sons and daughters of hippies and like Boy Scouts.
Okay, I'm going to go one step further, because
Okay.
I don't know if you know this story. Okay. I used to go rafting, and in 1984 to 1986, during that time, the only thing that they allowed us to use down the Colorado River was Dr. Bronner's. I remember the very first time I used it, and I thought, okay, this is kind of minty, this is fun. Is there any shampoo here? And it was like, well, that's the shampoo. Oh, okay. Oh shoot, I don't know where my toothpaste is. It's okay, take the bottle, put it on your toothbrush, brush with it. I was so overwhelmed by this one bottle being able to do everything. And the fact is, it didn't pollute the river. That is how far back I go. I don't even know if you were born, okay? This is 1984.
Thank you.
Thank
First of all,
you.
it's a compliment. Yes, I was 9.
Okay, you were 9 years old. Okay, that's how far back we've been using Dr. Bronner's.
Very nice.
And when I first got introduced, when I wrote the book to Benny, Benny Andreas, that what happened was when he came to me and he said, oh, by the way, here's a business card. I realized that night I took a photo of my Bronner products, which were in the kitchen, and the book, and I said, this is incredible. This is amazing. And then to follow the story, I knew a little bit about the story. But when did you first find out that your great-grandfather was in the Holocaust?
One thing that's really interesting about my family is that I didn't know my heritage so much. My grandfather, Dr. Bronner, his mission was to save the earth, right?
Yes.
To save mankind, humankind. And unfortunately that took precedence over like being the best father to his son, which is my dad. And so my dad was actually raised in foster homes. He was raised in foster homes, and so I'll skip forward that there was reconciliation and I had a good relationship with my grandfather, but my father's mother died when he was 2, and she was Catholic, and so I was raised more in a Presbyterian household, right? And so, you know, when I remember studying the Holocaust, and like my best friend, and he's still my best friend from kindergarten, is Jewish, and as I said, I went to I kind of grew up in a conservative area where he was the only Jewish person I knew, and it wasn't until later that I really understood my own Jewish heritage. And my grandfather, Dr. Bronner, he was also kind of the master of hyperbole, right? And so he had told me that he was in a concentration camp. And so that was my first memory, my first understanding of the Holocaust, that he was in a concentration camp. As I say, my grandfather is all about hyperbole. He was actually put into a mental asylum for wanting to unite the planet. And so
I saw the film.
You saw the film.
Yes.
And I said, this is why I said there's so much to pack into 30 minutes because I've thrown all this stuff out there.
We can go a little over.
But, you know, it was only later when I put the timing together that my grandfather came to America in 1929, and understanding that while there was definitely anti-Semitism, the really bad stuff didn't start until like, you know, 32 or 33 when Hitler came to power, that I realized that, wait, my grandfather, he wasn't in Germany during that time. He couldn't have been in a concentration camp. He was actually referring to the men's hospital as like a concentration camp. And it was only when I was in high school and I spent summers with him that I finally understood the whole story. And what he meant, and then finding out about his parents. So my grandfather was all about the present and future. And the only time he referred to the past was when he was trying to kind of make sense of where we needed to go. And what I mean by that is that whenever I asked him, hey Grandpa, tell me about what it was like to be Jewish in Germany before you came to America, he would say, I don't have time for that. We must unite spaceship Earth. And he would talk for half an hour before I could ask anything else. And you know, another thing, my grandfather was blind. He went blind in the 60s. So he pretty much built his company with no eyesight. And so oftentimes, like, you know, I couldn't say, you know, oh, just 1 second, Grandpa, or anything. I mean, I would just be sitting with my feet dangling off the couch, you know, 8 years old.
He felt your presence.
He felt my presence. He did feel my presence. But what ended up happening is that over the course of the last 20 years, during my career at Bronners, my brother and I have used kind of our, you know, the sales of our soap in Germany, the supply of our soap from fair trade countries, to kind of explore where did we come from, to go back to Laupai, where my great-great-grandfather started making soap in 1858 in the basement
1858. Wow.
And then where my great-grandfather actually going to see the factory that my great-grandfather had in Heilbronn, Germany, where he made soap. You know, we had 2 generations of soap makers. And I actually went to the factory that the Nazis forced them to sell for the equivalent of a Reichmark.
And what city was Heil?
It's Heilbronn.
Heilbronn. But
so,
it's interesting because the real last name was Heilbronner.
Heilbronner. Back in, I believe, the 1800s,
yes,
the German Kaiser forced all the Jews to take the name of their city. And so you won't find too many Heilbronners in America, but you'll find many Bronners, because most of the Heilbronners cut off the Heil.
Sure.
Because they were Jewish when they came as immigrants. And for example, there's a Michael Bronner who has written a book on rhymes. Like if you ever want to know what rhymes with potato, you just open his book and it tells you.
And it tells you. Okay.
Everything rhymes with potato.
Tomato.
See, you needed that. But yes, so he was my grandfather also cut the name Heil off when he came to America. My grandfather emigrated to Chicago, no money, slept on top of the YMCA with a pillowcase filled with plastic scraps, and pulled himself up by his bootstraps, like the archetypal American immigrant success story, where it pulled him out from nothing, and through perseverance, passion, knowledge, he became a successful consultant for the soap industry. He has several patents, and it was while he was doing that work that he got a letter from his father, who was forced to sell the factory, who was deported to Theresienstadt, as was my great-grandmother deported to Auschwitz. This after my grandfather had pled, please come to America, and they said, no, Hitler will be forgotten in 4 years. We're going to stay. This is my home.
This was in 39, 40?
This was, yeah, right. It was right after Kristallnacht.
Okay, so
38,
39. 39,
yeah.
Okay.
And you probably know this, but Hitler's regime actually allowed letters to be sent from concentration camps to the States for a while, heavily censored, but it was, I think, a PR move to have people here be like, oh, look, my family's not so bad. I don't know what those stories are about concentration camps being
Right, and a lot of them actually wrote letters taking the addresses and writing on behalf. So there are things that, well, we really know the truth, but this particular story is interesting because the family received a letter.
A letter. So my grandfather received a letter from Theresienstadt from his father, and all the words had been blacked out on this letter except for 3 words, and it said, "You were right."
You were right. And that was in Theresienstadt.
That's right.
Was he killed in Theresienstadt or was he killed in Auschwitz?
Obviously records are a little hazy, but I Theresienstadt.
Do you remember your uncle talking about the 3 words, "You were right"?
Very clearly. I remember him telling me that, my grandfather had received this letter, and that instead of reacting in anger and in vengeance, I mean, of course he was massive sorrow, but instead of pivoting towards revenge and anger, and I'm gonna get those son of a bitch Germans, he instead reacted the other way with a message of uniting the human race. And just imagine that. That's a message of love.
Yeah.
Right? And so taking this horrific tragedy, it's incomprehensible, and using that to, plead with people that we need to come together as one before we destroy ourselves. That takes a massive amount of will and a massive amount of love in the human spirit. So.
Do you remember when your grandfather was blind, or did you always know him as being blind?
My earliest memory of my grandfather is when he had come up to Los Angeles on the train, and we were in the car, and my father asked him, "Dad, do you know if it's night out or if it's still daytime?" And he kind of looked out and he's like, I think it's nighttime. And he was right.
How
but
old were you?
I was like 3 or 4. But since then, he was blind. And so I grew up with him being blind. And, one thing about being raised with a blind grandfather and being raised in a family that makes a soap with your grandfather's religious and social philosophy on there is that you think it's normal.
Yeah.
Right? You would ask me, like, when did you realize you were a Bronner? Well, it took me a while because I thought it was perfectly natural, that some people are blind and some people launch a product with their philosophy on it. And I'm always interested to hear people like you tell your story about when they were introduced to the product, because I will never know what it's like to see Dr. Bronners for the first time.
Yeah.
It's like you trying to remember your first time experiencing Kleenex.
That's an amazing, that's an amazing thought. That is an amazing, and I remember it to this day when I used it. Never heard of it, down the river.
Yeah.
This stuff is awesome.
And it's still the only soap that they recommend you use, the National Park Service, when you're visiting the Grand Canyon.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah. There were people who attempted to do their hair and stuff, and they were just screaming, you know, the guides and everything. And they were just like, nope, nope, nope. Then when I learned to become a guide, it was like the only product we can use. And after a while, you don't think about anything else. There's nothing else in my house except this. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy.
You're my type of gal.
It's great. Well, Mike, where's the postcard now?
Postcard now is, unfortunately, we don't have it right now. I believe it was at my uncle's or whatnot, but that postcard has been lost right now. What we do have is the letter Dr. Bronner, who purchased the factory from my great-grandfather for like a right mark. We have the letter that he wrote to the customers of the Metaform siphon fabric, Metaform soap factory. That's what it was called. And the letter he wrote to the Metaform soap factory says, to loyal customers of the Metaform soap factory, you'll be happy to know that the company has been returned to Aryan hands. You can continue to expect the same level of customer service and quality that you've received in the past. Heil Hitler, Dr. Bronner. And for me, that letter is almost more chilling, if you can believe it. It's almost more chilling than the letter that said you were right, because it was like a normal letter. It wasn't, Dr. Bronner didn't think that 80 years later I'd be telling you, oh, can you believe he wrote this letter? No, it was a normal letter, just part of day-to-day activities, you know, just totally acknowledging that this Holocaust thing was, you know, fact of life. And Heil Hitler, Dr. Bronner. It's just
that's
crushing.
And the thing is that here you are in our Southern California. I'm not going to say South Bay yet. Who knows if Bronners will decide to move to South Bay, hint, hint, hint. But the thing is that you've had this story in you. Have you told it personally to anybody like you're telling me now?
Yes, we actually have a documentary that was done on our company. It wasn't me telling that story. It was actually
But
my
you
Uncle Ralph.
personally, have you spoken like this?
I have. I
Okay.
have. And it definitely is the goosebump story of the letter.
And you still feel it in you by the end of the day. Like, we're going to pack up, go back to where we have to go, and then all day you're going to think, oh, hi, Grandpa, you know? So let's think about this. You are a third, or you would be the fourth generation?
So I'm third generation in America and fifth generation in going back to Germany.
Going back to Germany. Wow. But with your great-grandfather, I'm just trying to think, that would be fourth? Because it's like your grandfather?
So that would be fourth from him.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't see much of that.
No.
I mean, this
no
was like
thanks.
super early. Yeah. Did your grandfather was a hoot? You know that?
Yeah, I've heard hoot is one of those words I've heard him.
You've heard that before. No, but as far as like
eccentric,
eccentric.
visionary. You know, he was, when he first came up with his philosophy, all one God faith, which was in response to getting that letter. He was put in the mental hospital. And my line is that he was put in a mental hospital because people thought he was crazy for having this vision of the future. And the line that I say is, there's a fine line between madness and genius, and yesterday's crackpot is today's visionary.
Yeah, from what I know, I mean, the company, it just barely hung on, and it took a vision, a solid vision, one world vision, to really bring the company back up to what we have today, that you can go to any store and pick up Dr. Bronner.
Yeah, I mean, it was a company built on the vision. My grandfather started putting his philosophy on the soap when
There's a lot of philosophy.
there's a lot of philosophy on there, and every label has different philosophy. So
it's great.
for my grandfather, it was about it wasn't about like coming up with new fragrances because of customer demand. It was because he ran out of room and he needed to write more. So he came up with I believe it was peppermint and almond and eucalyptus and lavender, baby,
Rose.
tea tree, rose.
Yeah,
Yes,
I like rose.
Yeah, rose is nice.
Citrus.
citrus.
I can name them
yeah.
all. Question, why Escondido?
Why Escondido? My grandfather, when he was put into the mental hospital, which he called a concentration camp, but it was a mental hospital.
Remind me to tell you a story after that, okay? So it's a very short one.
But he ended up escaping twice and was put back in. So the third time he hitchhiked to California to get really far away from Illinois. And he found himself in Pershing Square, which is in downtown LA, and was in the late 40s with a hotbed of political activity. A lot of philosophers stood on soapboxes, so did people talking about religion and politics. And so my grandfather fit right in. And it was when he rented out auditoriums to give his speeches that he started handing out soap as a parting gift. And that's when people started leaving after they got the soap and not listening to him. And that's when he decided to put the message on the bottle. And in the 60s, when my father got out of the Navy, he went to go work at the company that was producing my grandfather's soap in LA. And my grandfather came down to Escondido because of, at the time it was really quiet. There was a lot of New Age thinkers in Escondido. He loved avocado trees, and he was blind, but he really loved to sunbathe nude on his sun deck. You can do that, Escondido.
Yeah. Now remember that we're in Vista, and I'm Chula Vista, but Escondido is a great place.
Yeah.
Just so you know. I had the pleasure of meeting somebody by the name of Trudy.
Oh, Trudy, I've heard of her. She's my mom.
Trudy is awesome.
Yes, she is.
Yeah. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman.
You know what I say about Trudy?
What?
Well, first of all, I never call her Trudy. Call her mom. And second of all, she is our CFO. So she has helped this company expand from being a $5 million company when my grandfather passed to being over $150 million in revenue company this year. And I say she still pays my allowance.
Wow.
Because she's the CFO. Right?
Okay.
That's where my salary comes from.
When my mother spoke here
Yeah.
about 2 years ago, my mother was so taken by Trudy because what I remembered was that I had my never forget symbol. Your mother had a cross, and they looked almost identical, except the fact that mine was a cross, and I mean the X, and hers was a cross. And I just remember my mother saying, "Oh, I would love to come back and just have a cup of coffee with Trudy." And I just want you to know that she left a very lasting impression on my mom as being such a wonderful woman, and the responsibility, which goes to show you that behind every great man is a great woman. And I feel that about Trudy. So I just wanted to put that out there. So when you do see your mama, please tell her, Grandma, that I give her my love, okay, and thinking about her. Great Grandpa.
Yes.
Grandpa.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know he can see me. Then there's Papa.
Pop.
Pop. The son.
Yes.
Now there's a new generation.
There's a new generation, a first grader who is doing his second day of online learning.
Okay. Tell me how the generations have changed and what the vision is for Dr. Bronner's, which I will use forever.
Right. Well, it's interesting. It starts with my great-great-grandfather was in Laupine and started his first soap factory, followed by my great-grandfather who wanted to be a soap maker too, but there's only room for one soap factory in Laupine, so he went to Heilbronn. My grandfather, he was a master soap maker, but his father thought he was a little bit too political, right? Talking about Zionism and things like that. So his father said, we don't mix politics and soap. And that's when the reason my grandfather came to America, it wasn't necessarily trying to escape the anti-Semitism or the early onset of...
Okay, it's important to hear this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, and my grandfather here built this company on the vision of uniting the human race. But he ended up going blind in the 60s, and still, without advertising, without salespeople, without eyesight, with a label that talked about Muhammad, Jesus, and Buddha, still managed to become the #1 selling natural soap in America based only on word of mouth. Amazing individual. But I find that my father is the one who really actualized what my grandfather visualized, right? Like pulling into practice the kind of all-one vision to give free health care with 0 deductibles to all of our employees, capping salaries at 5 to 1, that the lowest paid fully vested worker who's been here 5 years will, compared to the highest worker, it will only be a 5 times difference, no matter how big we get. And so just this year, we've been very blessed as a company with business resulting from COVID, even though COVID's devastating. But because everybody wants soap and everybody needs sanitizer, we've had a big surge in demand. But regardless of that, my brother and I are only going to get paid the same amount than we were before because of that 5 to 1 ratio. That money will go to charity and activism. And so, my father one of the first things my father did when my grandfather passed away was take a piece of property that my grandfather had left him. This company was about $3 million in debt. Everybody was saying that is a tax debt, right?
Right.
Inheritance tax. And everybody was saying to my dad and my mom and my uncle, sell the property and pay off your taxes. But my father, my uncle, my mom, and my aunt were like no. My father grew up in foster homes, and there's more of that later.
And his brother did too.
And his brother did too. So
There's 2 brothers and a sister.
there's 2 brothers and a sister. That's right. After my grandfather passed, he left my parents' generation a company $3 million in debt and a piece of property worth $1.2 million. Everybody told my parents, sell the property, pay for taxes. And they said, no, we're gonna donate it to the Boys and Girls Club for a campground for disadvantaged kids. Pretty much throwing down the gauntlet to my generation, me and my brother, that this company is not going to just be about enriching ourselves. It's going to be about giving back to the community. That we are going to, it's not going to be an afterthought to how this company operates. We are going to build the compensation and treatment of our employees into our business plan. It's not going to be an afterthought. We're going to build in the fair trade aspect of our supply chain into our cost of goods. It won't be an afterthought. We are always going to understand that, we are a for-profit, but we have the DNA of a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And that's, for my brother and I, it's really taking kind of all these words you see on the bottle.
Oh, yeah.
And we've actually changed it here.
This is my favorite, just so you know.
So we take those words of my grandfather, and it's all about applying that to the world we inhabit. And, and we're never satisfied, right? We just want to constantly improve. And we're happy to introduce a new program with these bottles we're talking about. It's called Regenerative Organic Certification. And so it's not just organic.
Nah, can you go ahead and I noticed this is new.
That's new, and that's just a temporary to promote. This is a promotion of the new Regenerative Organic Certification, which combines the best of organic, better soil health. So you're actually taking carbon from the environment and putting it back in the soil.
Wow.
You're bringing in fair trade and good animal welfare, all in one. And so.
Yeah, I noticed new words. I noticed the new words. Yeah.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're so far above and beyond any other soap company, cleansing company. Just so you know, I use South Soap.
South Suds.
South Suds. I'm a South Suds user.
It's a good product.
And that is a great product. In fact, I use them all, but it's not about me sitting here. They sell themselves, number one. But I will tell you that I'm gonna cry. I gotta try not to cry. I am so grateful for what Dr. Bronners has done, the family, to give back to our South Bay Holocaust survivors and their families. They use the soap. They have the soap when we had our opening. I don't know if you're aware, but everybody got a bar of soap.
I'm very well aware.
And I will tell you that we are so blessed to have this. I stop crying, Sandy. This truly has been wonderful. One of my mother's greatest memories was coming here and be able to speak and remind people, but still to have kindness in the heart, which is, I think, something that Dr. Bronners did. I think he came to terms with everything that happened. The story I was going to tell you, when my mother had to go into her first assisted living, I thought everything was fine and dandy. When my father, were in the assisted living, I went back to Theresienstadt. When I came back, I went, Mom, I went back to Theresienstadt. I got to see what the concentration camp was. My mother looked at me, sat back like this and said, let me tell you something. Where I'm at right now is a concentration camp. I'm not living here. And I thought to myself, from here on, this day forward, I will never have my mother in this kind of situation again. She went from this nursing facility to, when my father died, to an assisted living. And I reminded them that my mother will be treated with dignity, kindness, and that this will never, ever happen again. So hearing your story and hearing my story, we as the next generation need to remind people that just because they're getting older and they have a history, it doesn't mean that they need to be locked up in a place where they compare it to a concentration camp. Correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So to hear you talk about this, and then I remember Ruthie. I don't talk much about that story, but I just remember her saying, so you went to a concentration, okay, you saw where I was? Well, that's what's here. That should never happen in America. Never. You're wonderful.
Thank you very
I have a
much.
tour for you to see. You're going to come down to South Bay.
I will.
When we open, when the library opens.
Sure, absolutely. I would
Yeah.
love to. Absolutely.
You're great, Mike.
You too.
And with that, we say thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Be safe.
Fishing and a splashing. Oh, yeah, was a rolling when the strolling. Woo, he was a moving and a grooving. Hot, moving and a grooving. Yeah, 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 reeling with the feeling. Split